The text was sent at 2:18 in the morning. Damon Ellery's hands were still dirty from the night shift when he typed it, a quiet, desperate message begging for 10 more days to pay rent. His wallet held $4 and a gas station receipt. On the kitchen table, half hidden under Talia's crayon drawings, sat the eviction notice. 48 hours. Pay in full or get out. He meant to send it to Lennox Rucker, his landlord. He didn't. In his exhaustion, he scrolled past the wrong name. The message went to Adriana Bellamy, CEO of Harbor Light Communities, the company where Damon worked temporary night shifts mopping floors and fixing broken pipes. The same woman who ran a $100 million operation. The same woman who had never once spoken to him directly. He realized the mistake immediately. His stomach dropped. He typed an apology so fast his fingers stumbled over the letters. He begged her to forget it, to pretend it never happened. Then his phone lit up. Her reply was 4 words and 1 sentence. "Don't leave that apartment." Damon stared at the screen for a long time. He had no idea that one wrong number was about to change everything. If stories like this one speak to you, stories about real dignity, real struggle, and the moments that turn everything around, subscribe to our channel. We put out a new story every week, and we'd love for you to be there for the next one. Damon Ellery had learned a long time ago that pride was a luxury. You could afford it when the bills were paid, when the refrigerator wasn't half empty, when your daughter wasn't sleeping in the next room trusting you to hold the world together. But on the nights when everything was falling apart, pride became something you quietly folded up and put away like a good shirt you couldn't afford to wear out. He had been doing maintenance work his whole adult life. Not because it was easy, it wasn't, but because he was genuinely good at it. He understood buildings the way some people understood music. He could hear a pipe knocking behind a wall and tell you exactly where it was about to fail. He could look at a circuit board and know which relay was drawing too much current before the meter even confirmed it. That skill had once earned him steady work, a real salary, something close to stability. Then Talia's mother left. No argument, no warning that mattered, just a note on the counter and an empty closet. Talia was 2 years old. Damon was 31, working full-time for a mid-sized contracting firm, and suddenly he was doing it alone. He cut his hours to be home when Talia needed him. The firm didn't hold his position. The bills didn't pause either. By the time he landed the temporary night shift contract at Harbor Light Communities, he had already been through 2 other jobs that didn't work out. One that ended when the project was canceled, one that ended when the foreman decided a man who left early for daycare pickups wasn't reliable enough. Harbor Light wasn't a step up. It was a foothold. Maintenance work, graveyard hours, no benefits, no guarantee of next month. But it paid. And right now, paying was everything. He always came home from the night shift just before dawn. He would check on Talia, still asleep, her small hand curled under her chin, and that image was enough to keep him moving. He would shower quietly, eat whatever was left in the kitchen, and try to sleep a few hours before she woke up and needed breakfast and help with her shoes, and someone to tell her she looked good in her purple jacket. That was the routine. It had been holding, until the night he came home and found the notice on the door. It was printed on yellow paper, official-looking, with Lennox Rucker's property management company name across the top. 48 hours. Full payment required 3 months of back rent, plus a late fee that had been silently compounding. Damon stood in the hallway and read it twice. He already knew the math. He had been tracking it, trying to manage it, sending partial payments when he could, and explaining the rest in messages that Rucker never really acknowledged. He had believed, maybe naively, that the man understood, that they had some kind of unspoken arrangement. The notice made clear there was no arrangement. Damon went inside. Talia was asleep. He sat at the kitchen table with the notice and his phone and his $4 wallet and tried to think of anyone he could call. His sister in Philadelphia was dealing with her own situation. His old co-workers from the contracting firm had scattered. Opal Green, his neighbor 2 doors down, had been generous in small ways, watching Talia on short notice, sending over food when she made too much. But Opal was a retired school aide living on a fixed income. He couldn't ask her for money. He sat there for a long time in the quiet of that small kitchen, the only light coming from the stove clock. Then he picked up his phone and started typing. He meant it to go to Rucker. He had the landlord's number saved as Rucker, landlord, and he found it quickly enough. Or he thought he did. The message he wrote was careful, measured, the kind of message you write when you're trying to sound steady even though your hands aren't. He explained that he had a paycheck coming in 10 days. He explained that he could cover the full amount then. He asked for the extension, said he understood if there were conditions, said he would put it in writing if needed. He hit send. The confirmation screen showed the name at the top of the message thread, Adriana Bellamy. Damon stared at it. His brain refused the information for a full 3 seconds. Then everything went cold. Adriana Bellamy was the CEO of Harbor Light Communities. She had sent a company-wide message to all staff 2 weeks earlier, a formal update about a new housing initiative, and her contact information had been included at the bottom for follow-up questions. Damon had saved it out of habit, the way he saved every number that came through official channels in case there was ever a maintenance emergency that needed escalating. Her name sat in his contacts 1 entry above Rucker's. In his exhaustion in the dark, he had scrolled 1 name too far. He sent a follow-up immediately. "I'm so sorry. That was meant for someone else. Please disregard." He typed it fast, no punctuation, almost frantic. Then he set the phone face down on the table and pressed his palms flat against the wood and breathed. He thought about what she had just read. The fear in it, the smallness of it. A man begging for 10 days because he couldn't cover rent. Her employee, someone who swept floors in the building she ran. He had just handed his most private humiliation to a stranger with a corner office, and there was absolutely nothing he could do to take it back. His phone lit up. He didn't want to look. He made himself look. Her message was brief. She had read both texts. She asked for the address of the apartment, the amount owed, and the landlord's name. No preamble, no softness, no performance of sympathy. Just 3 direct questions sent at 2:30 in the morning, which meant she was awake, which meant she had read it immediately. Damon didn't know what to do with that. He answered. He didn't know why he answered, some combination of shock and the exhaustion of having no other move. He gave her the address. He gave her the number. He told her the landlord's name was Lennox Rucker. Her reply came back within minutes. "Don't leave that apartment. Don't sign anything. Come to my office in the morning." He read it several times. Then he turned off the kitchen light and sat in the dark for a while, because he genuinely didn't know how to feel about any of it. He brought Talia to Opal's at 7 in the morning. Opal answered the door in her robe, took 1 look at Damon's face, and didn't ask questions. She just held the door open and said she'd have Talia ready for school. Damon thanked her and meant it in a way that didn't have words. The Harbor Light headquarters was a glass and steel building in the Inner Harbor District, the kind of building that announced its own importance from 3 blocks away. Damon had only ever entered through the service entrance on the side. He stood on the front sidewalk for longer than he should have in the best shirt he owned, a white button-down he'd pressed that morning with an iron that had a slow leak of steam, and made himself walk through the front doors. The receptionist sent him up to the executive floor without any visible reaction, which meant Adriana had already cleared his name at the desk. That small logistical detail bothered him more than he expected. It meant she had thought ahead. It meant this was planned, at least on her side, which meant she had made a decision about him before he arrived. He didn't know yet what that decision was. Her office was at the end of a carpeted hallway that was very quiet for 8 in the morning. The door was open. Adriana Bellamy was standing at the window when he came in, looking out at the harbor. She turned when she heard him and gestured to the chair across from her desk. She was younger than he had imagined from the company photo on the website. Mid-30s, probably close to his age. She wore a dark blazer and no expression that he could read immediately. She didn't smile. She didn't offer the kind of warm greeting people give when they're trying to make someone feel comfortable. She just looked at him and said, "Sit down, Mr. Ellery." He sat. Adriana sat down across from him and set a folder on the desk. She said the company had an emergency assistance fund for employees in housing crisis, but that it had never been made available to temporary contract workers, not because of a formal policy that excluded them, but because no one had ever flagged the gap. She said his situation had made her look at the fund's eligibility language more carefully that morning, and the exclusion wasn't actually written into the terms. It was an assumption that had calcified into practice. Damon listened to all of this without speaking. Then she said something else. She said that the apartment complex where he lived, the building managed by Lennox Rucker, was part of a portfolio that had an indirect financing relationship with Harborlight through a community development fund. She said the eviction timeline he had described was aggressive in a way that didn't match the fund's stated guidelines for tenant protection. Damon asked her what that meant practically. She said it meant she wanted to look into it before he did anything. She said he should not sign any agreement Rucker sent, should not make any payment under pressure, and should not vacate the apartment voluntarily. She said she would have someone from the legal team make a call that morning. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I need to be clear about something." She waited. "I didn't send that message on purpose," he said. "I'm not looking for charity. I'm not trying to make my situation into your problem. If there's a fund I'm actually eligible for, I'd like to know about it and apply for it like anyone else would. But I don't want you doing anything for me because you feel sorry for me. I've been taking care of my daughter for 6 years without anyone feeling sorry for us, and we've been fine." The last word came out a little harder than he intended. Adriana looked at him for a moment with an expression he still couldn't fully read. Then she said, "I'm not doing this because I feel sorry for you. I'm doing it because an eviction notice was issued in 48 hours against a tenant in a building connected to my company's funding, and that's not how the program is supposed to work. Your text message was an accident. What's happening to you is not." Damon said nothing. "You can walk out of here if you want," she added. "That's your call. But if you stay, I'll treat this the way I'd treat any other operational problem, by looking at the facts and doing what's correct." He thought about Talia asking Opal that morning whether they were going to be okay. He thought about the way Talia had said it, not scared exactly, but careful. The way a 6-year-old sounds when she's learned to read a room. He stayed. The official job title was Maintenance Coordination Associate. It was a real position with a real salary, real benefits, and a desk in the operations wing on the 3rd floor. Damon had applied through the internal posting process the same way anyone else would have. He filled out the form, submitted his work history, and sat through a formal interview with 2 people from the facilities team. He did not ask Adriana for help with any part of it. He had been clear about that with himself before he even put his name on the application. He got the job because he knew the buildings better than anyone else who applied. 6 months of night shift maintenance work had given him a working knowledge of every mechanical system in Harborlight's core properties. He had fixed things that the day crew hadn't noticed were broken. He had written up informal incident reports that nobody had asked for simply because he believed in documentation. When the interview panel asked him to walk through how he would handle a simultaneous HVAC failure across 2 buildings in winter, he answered in specifics: which valves, which sequence, which subcontractors to call, and in what order. The other candidates had answered in generalities. None of that stopped the talk. It started quietly, the way talk always does in the break room in the elevator, in the particular silence that falls when someone walks into a space where their name had just been spoken. People had heard pieces of the story. A night shift worker, a text message, the CEO. Nobody has a full picture, but the outline was enough to generate a narrative that was simpler and more satisfying than the truth he had gotten lucky. He had stumbled into the right person's sympathy at the right moment, and now he was sitting at a desk he hadn't really earned. Damon heard versions of this. He didn't respond to any of them. What he did instead was work. The first real test came 3 weeks in. One of Harborlight's older residential properties, a 6-story building in East Baltimore that had been part of the company's original portfolio, had a heating system that had been patched and repatched so many times that nobody on the current facilities team fully understood how it was configured. Complaints had been coming in from residents for 2 winters. The previous fix had involved replacing a circulation pump, but the problem had returned. The building manager had requested an external contractor assessment, which was going to cost the company several $1,000s and take 3 weeks to schedule. Damon asked to look at it first. He spent 2 evenings in the mechanical room with the original system diagram's physical copies he found in a filing cabinet that hadn't been opened in years, and traced the configuration by hand. The problem wasn't the pump. It was a zone valve that had been installed incorrectly during a renovation in the 1990s, diverting flow away from the upper floors and creating a pressure imbalance that nobody had ever properly diagnosed. The fix took one afternoon and cost the company less than $400 in parts. The building manager sent a note to the facilities director saying the residents on the upper floors had heat for the first time in 2 winters. Damon didn't expect recognition for it. He wrote it up, filed it in the project log, and moved on to the next item on his list. But while he was in the mechanical room running his final checks, he found something else. He almost didn't look twice at it because on the surface, it seemed like a routine supply order, a replacement parts requisition that had been processed 6 months ago. But the quantities were wrong. The parts listed didn't match the scope of any repair he could find in the maintenance history. He cross-referenced the invoice against the work orders and found a gap that was significant enough that it couldn't be explained by rounding or administrative error. Someone had billed for materials that had never been used. He photographed the documents. He put the copies in a folder and kept it in his desk drawer and told himself he would figure out the right way to handle it. He didn't know yet that this was the thing that would change everything. Bryce Kerrigan had been with Harbor Light for 11 years. He had the kind of institutional confidence that comes from being in a place long enough to believe that the place belongs to you. He ran the operations division with a team of 12 managed vendor relationships worth several $1 million annually, and had a way of speaking in meetings that suggested he had already considered every possibility and found the others lacking. He had not liked Damon from the beginning. It wasn't something he said directly. Bryce was too practiced for that. It was in the way he referenced Damon in team meetings, always with a slight emphasis on the word temporary, as though the new title hadn't fully registered. It was in the way he redirected credit. When the heating system fix saved the company, the contractor assessment Bryce mentioned in his weekly report that the facilities team had identified a solution internally, without naming who had found it. Damon noticed. He filed that information alongside everything else and kept moving. The problems between them became more visible after Damon brought his concerns to Adriana. He had gone back and forth about it for nearly a week. The discrepancies he had found in the supply records weren't limited to the one building. Once he knew what to look for, he found similar patterns in 3 other properties: small overstatements in materials costs, fees billed against work orders that didn't exist, patterns that were subtle enough to pass a surface-level audit, but consistent enough when laid side by side to suggest something deliberate. He brought the folder to Adriana on a Thursday afternoon. He laid the documents on her desk and walked her through what he had found item by item. He didn't editorialize. He didn't name anyone. He just showed her the numbers and explained where they didn't line up. Adriana was quiet for a long time after he finished. She looked at the papers rather than at him, and Damon could see the particular stillness of someone working through implications they hadn't anticipated. Harbor Light had built its public identity around the idea of responsible, community-centered development. It ran programs. It had a foundation. Its marketing materials featured families and the words trust and integrity in large fonts. If what Damon had found was accurate, then somewhere inside the company's own operations, someone had been systematically stealing from the very communities the company claimed to serve. Adriana asked him if he had shared this with anyone else. He said no. She asked him if he had made copies. He said yes, and that the originals were still in the filing systems where he had found them. She told him to leave everything with her and to document the physical locations of the source files so the legal team could verify the chain of custody. Then she said, "This took courage to bring in Damon." He told her it didn't feel like courage. It felt like what anyone with a conscience should do. She looked at him then in a way that was different from the look she had given him in their first meeting, less measured, more direct. She said, "You'd be surprised how many people walk past things like this because it's easier." Bryce found out within days. Damon didn't know exactly how, whether someone in the legal office had let something slip, or whether Bryce had simply noticed that certain files were being reviewed and drawn his own conclusions. But the shift was immediate and unmistakable. Bryce called a team meeting and spent 20 minutes discussing the importance of data access protocols, looking at Damon the entire time without looking at him directly. It was a particular kind of performance, the kind designed to make one person in a room feel exposed without giving them anything specific to push back against. 2 days later, Maren Holt from HR stopped Damon in the hallway and said there had been a complaint about unauthorized access to operational records. She said it in a neutral tone, the voice people use when they're delivering information they haven't yet decided how to feel about. She said she would need to meet with him formally. Damon asked who had filed the complaint. Maren said she wasn't able to share that at this stage of the process. He knew anyway. In the formal HR meeting, Bryce had submitted a written account claiming that Damon had accessed restricted vendor files outside the scope of his job responsibilities, and that the access appeared to have been conducted without proper authorization. He had attached a printout of system access logs that showed Damon's login credentials used to open files in a vendor management subfolder. Damon told Maren that he had accessed those files in the course of a standard maintenance audit. He explained that he had been in the mechanical room of the East Baltimore property, had found physical documentation in an unlocked cabinet, and had accessed the digital records to verify what he was looking at. He had done it during working hours using his standard login, and he had documented everything in his project notes. Maren listened carefully. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't look hostile either. She said the investigation would need to run its course. Meanwhile, Lennox Rucker called. Damon hadn't heard from his landlord since Harbor Light's legal team had made contact 2 months earlier, a call that had resulted in a payment plan being established and the eviction proceeding being withdrawn. Rucker's tone was different now. He said there were new late fees that had accrued. He said the payment plan terms had a clause Damon hadn't understood correctly. He said if the full adjusted balance wasn't paid within 10 days, he would be restarting the eviction process. The timing was not a coincidence. Damon knew that much. It all converged in a single week. The HR investigation, the renewed pressure from Rucker, and then the meeting, the one that would become the moment Damon remembered most clearly from the entire period. Not because of what was said, but because of what happened at the end of it. Bryce had called a broader operations review framed as a quarterly performance check. There were 8 people in the room. Damon was the only one from his level of the team. About 20 minutes in, Bryce shifted from the agenda to what he called a concern about professional standards. He said in the tone of someone making an observation rather than an accusation that it was important for everyone on the team to operate within their defined role, and that personal circumstances, however sympathetic, should not be confused with professional qualification. He didn't say Damon's name. He didn't have to. Damon looked at the table. He thought about Talia. He thought about the folder of documents in his desk drawer and the physical copies still sitting in filing cabinets in East Baltimore. He thought about how much easier it would be to say nothing. He was pushing his chair back to leave when Adriana walked into the room. She hadn't been on the meeting invite. Nobody had expected her. She stood at the head of the table and looked at Bryce and said with the same even tone she used for everything, "Finish your sentence, Bryce." Bryce said he had been making a general point about team standards. Adriana said, "You were making a specific point about a specific person. Finish it or don't, but stop doing it in the middle." The room was very quiet. Then she looked at Damon and her voice didn't soften exactly, but it changed in a way that was unmistakable. She said in front of everyone, "He isn't here because someone felt sorry for him. He's here because he's the only person in this building who told the truth when it would have been easier not to. If that makes people uncomfortable, then people should think carefully about why." Bryce said nothing. Nobody else said anything either. Damon looked at Adriana. She gave him one small nod, the kind that isn't meant for the room, only for the person it's directed at, and then she left. The final blow came on a Friday. Bryce had spent the intervening days doing something Damon hadn't anticipated. He had gone into the system and deleted specific file access records, then replaced them with a reconstructed log that showed Damon accessing vendor files outside of business hours from a remote connection without any corresponding project note. The fabricated record made it look deliberate. It made it look like Damon had been gathering information covertly over a period of weeks, in a pattern consistent with someone building a case against the company rather than doing his job. Marin brought Damon in again and showed him the new record. She said she had no choice but to place him on formal suspension pending a complete review. Her voice was careful, not unkind, but the outcome was the same. He was told to leave his badge at the front desk. Bryce went to the board that same afternoon and presented the situation as a data security incident with potential legal exposure. He framed Adriana's public defense of Damon as an emotional reaction that had compromised her judgment. He said the board needed to consider whether her leadership could be trusted if she continued to protect an employee who was now under formal investigation. The board told Adriana she needed to step back from the matter and let the internal process proceed without her involvement. Damon drove home and found a notice taped to his apartment door. Final notice, 10 days, no further extensions. He went inside. Talia was at the kitchen table with a coloring book, the same steady, careful child she always was. She looked up and asked if he was okay. He told her he was fine, that he'd just had a long day. She nodded seriously and went back to her coloring. After she was asleep, he sat at that same kitchen table where he had sent the wrong text message months ago, and he called Adriana. When she answered, he told her to stop. He told her he wasn't worth her losing the company she had built. He said he would accept the suspension, find a way to clear his name on his own time, and figure out the housing situation. He said she should protect herself. Adriana was quiet for a moment on the other end. Then she said, "Go to sleep, Damon. Don't make any decisions tonight." He said, "I'm serious." She said, "I know you are. Go to sleep." He stayed at the table for a while after the call ended. Talia's coloring book was still open on the table, a half-finished drawing of a house with a yellow door and flowers in the window. He looked at it for a long time. Then he went to his room and thought about everything he still had in his possession that Bryce could not delete. The event had been planned for months. Harbor Light Community's annual housing forum was the kind of gathering the company did well a ballroom at the Marriott in the Inner Harbor. 200 seats filled with investors, city officials, non-profit partners, and journalists who covered urban development. There were panels and a catered lunch, and a keynote address from Adriana that had been drafted, reviewed, and polished by the communications team over 6 weeks. The theme this year was Building Communities That Last. The promotional materials featured photographs of smiling families standing in front of well-maintained buildings with clean sidewalks and flower boxes in the windows. Damon was not invited. He was on suspension. He was also on the morning of the event in his apartment with a cardboard box, trying to decide which of Talia's things to pack first. The final notice had meant what it said. Rucker had followed through. The locks were being changed that afternoon, and Damon had until noon to remove what he could carry. Opal had already taken Talia to her apartment under the pretense of helping bake something, so Talia wouldn't watch her father put her bedroom into boxes. Damon was grateful for that. He moved through the rooms carefully, methodically, the way he approached every problem one thing at a time in the right order. He had already called 2 shelters. Both had waiting lists. He had called his sister in Philadelphia the night before. She had a 2-bedroom apartment and a situation of her own, but she said yes without hesitating, and that had almost undone him the speed of her yes, the absence of conditions. He told her he might need a week, maybe 2. She told him to stop talking and just come. He was folding Talia's purple jacket into the box when his phone rang. It was Opal. She didn't speak right away, and Damon could hear in the background the small, particular sound of a child trying not to cry and not quite succeeding. Then Talia's voice came through, thin and careful, the voice she used when she was trying to be older than she was. She asked if she had done something wrong. She asked if that was why they couldn't stay in their home anymore. Damon sat down on the edge of Talia's bed with the purple jacket in his hands. He told her no. He told her she had not done anything wrong, not a single thing, not ever. His voice held. He wasn't sure how. After the call ended, he sat there for a moment with the phone in his lap. Then he stood up, put the jacket back in the box, picked up the folder he had kept in his desk drawer, and walked out the door. He had been thinking about the physical records for weeks. The fabricated digital logs that Bryce had created could only be countered by something Bryce couldn't touch, and the thing Bryce couldn't touch was paper. Actual paper, in actual filing cabinets, in the mechanical rooms and storage closets of buildings that Damon had spent 6 months working in before anyone had given him a login credential or a desk or a reason to think his records would ever matter. He had kept copies of everything. It was habit built over years of doing maintenance work where the blame for a problem almost always landed on the person who couldn't prove what they had or hadn't done. Damon had learned early that the only reliable protection was documentation, not digital, not dependent on a system that someone else controlled, but physical printed work orders, signed inspection sheets, handwritten notes in his own hand with dates and locations and the names of anyone who had been present. He kept them in a folder in his desk at home, and he had been adding to that folder since the first week he started at Harbor Light. The folder contained 3 months of maintenance records from 4 properties. Cross-referenced against the fraudulent supply invoices, they showed exactly what had been ordered, what had actually been used, and what the discrepancy was. They showed work orders that had been closed as complete, with materials that had never arrived on site. They showed Bryce's name on approval signatures for purchase orders that didn't correspond to any legitimate repair. The digital logs Bryce had manipulated showed when Damon had accessed certain files. But the physical records showed why, and they predated the digital access by months, because Damon had been collecting them on paper long before he ever opened a vendor file on the company system. He drove to the Marriott. He parked on the street 2 blocks away because he couldn't afford the garage. He sat in the car with the folder on the passenger seat and thought about what he was about to do. He wasn't doing it for himself, or not only for himself. He was doing it for the same reason he had brought the documents to Adriana the first time, because the people being hurt by what Bryce had done were people who couldn't afford to be hurt. Families paying inflated fees they didn't owe. Tenants losing their homes over manufactured debt. People exactly like him, who had no leverage and no visibility and no way of knowing that the system supposed to serve them was being quietly hollowed out by someone who had decided their money was his to take. He picked up the folder and went inside. The ballroom was in the middle of a session break when Damon arrived. People were standing in clusters with coffee cups, the low hum of networking conversation filling the room. He moved along the edge of the space looking for Adriana and found her near the stage talking to someone from the city planning office. She saw him and went still for just a moment in a way that no one else would have noticed. She excused herself and crossed to him. Damon held out the folder. He said, "I have the physical records. Everything I found with dates in my own handwriting before I ever touched a file on the company system. The originals are still in the buildings. I can show anyone where to find them." Adriana looked at the folder. She looked at him. She asked how he had gotten in. He said the event was listed as open to community stakeholders on the Harbor Light website, and that he was a community stakeholder whether the company currently agreed or not. Something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile, but close to one. She took the folder, looked through the first several pages, and said, "Stay here." She went to the stage, spoke briefly to the event coordinator, and took the microphone earlier than the program scheduled. The room quieted. People returned to their seats expecting the prepared keynote, the polished remarks about community investment and long-term vision that the communications team had spent 6 weeks refining. What they got instead was something different. Adriana stood at the podium and set the prepared remarks aside. She said that she had intended to speak today about what Harbor Light was building. She said she needed instead to speak about what she had just learned was being taken apart from the inside. She did not read from the folder. She spoke from what she knew from what Damon had brought to her weeks ago from the verification work her legal team had been conducting quietly in the background since she had first seen his documents, and from what she had just confirmed in the pages he handed her minutes before walking to the microphone. She told the room that an internal review had uncovered systematic billing fraud in Harbor Light's vendor operations, fraudulent supply invoices, manufactured fees, and a pattern of conduct that had contributed directly to the displacement of tenants in properties connected to the company's community development fund. She said the company was halting operations in the affected portfolio immediately pending a full audit. She said every family that had been charged fees they did not owe would be identified and the amounts returned. She said the individuals responsible would be referred to the appropriate authorities. Then she said one more thing. She said that the person who had found this documented it and brought it forward at personal cost that she was not going to minimize was standing in the back of the room, and that his name was Damon Ellery. The room turned. 200 people looked toward the back where Damon was standing in his pressed white shirt with his hands at his sides. He didn't move. He didn't perform anything for the room. He just stood there steady the way he had always been when things were at their worst. Not because he was unafraid, but because there was nothing left to do except hold his ground. Bryce was in the room. He had been sitting near the front part of the company's official contingent, and when Adriana finished speaking, he was the first one to stand not in applause, but with the body language of a man calculating his next move. There was no next move. The documents Damon had brought included physical copies of approval signatures that were Bryce's. The original files were still in the buildings exactly where Damon had said they would be. The fabricated digital log Bryce had created could be examined now against a paper trail that predated it by month. When the Harbor Light legal team arrived at the forum within the hour, they did not come to protect Bryce. They came because Adriana had been working with them in the weeks prior, quietly building the evidentiary record that Damon's original documents had set in motion. Bryce had assumed that suspending Damon and pressuring the board would be enough to bury the matter. He had not accounted for the fact that Adriana had kept moving even after the board told her to stop carefully, through proper legal channels, in a way that gave her no exposure and left him none either. The board meeting happened 3 days later. By then, the documentation had been reviewed by an external auditor who confirmed the pattern Damon had identified. The board did not ask Adriana to step back. They asked Bryce to step out. He resigned before they could formalize anything further, which was the kind of exit that fooled no one. Maren Holt came to Damon's suspension hearing, which had been reconvened with the new evidence in the record. She sat across the table from him and said, before the formal proceeding began, that she owed him an apology. She said she had looked at the complaint Bryce filed and had not looked hard enough at what was behind it, and that was a failure of process she intended to correct going forward. Damon told her he didn't hold it against her. He meant it. She had been working with what she had, so had everyone. The suspension was lifted. His position was reinstated. Adriana sent him a message that night that said only, "You still have a desk here. It'll be there Monday." The housing situation resolved alongside everything else. With the eviction proceeding now under legal review, given Rucker's connection to the fraudulent fee structure that had been exposed, Damon was able to return to the apartment. The payment plan was renegotiated with a legitimate third-party mediator, and the fees Rucker had manufactured were struck from the balance entirely. Talia didn't have to sleep anywhere but her own bed. In the months that followed, Harbor Light launched what it called the Resident Protection Initiative, a formal program with 3 components: a transparent rent deferral policy with clear written terms, an emergency assistance fund now explicitly available to all workers including contract employees, and a free tenant advisory line for anyone in the company's residential portfolio who had questions about their fees or their rights. Damon was asked to help design the implementation of the field oversight piece, the part of the program that sent someone into the buildings to make sure the policies were actually being followed, not just written down in a document that nobody read. He took the role because it was work he understood, and because he knew what it felt like to be on the other side of it. He knew how to talk to the maintenance crews. He knew which questions to ask the property managers to tell if something was being papered over. He knew, without needing it explained to him, what the difference felt like between a building that was genuinely maintained and one that was just being managed for appearances. The apartment changed slowly. A new lamp. A desk lamp for Talia's reading corner, which she had asked for herself after her teacher said she was reading above grade level and should try longer books. Opal Green came for dinner on Thursdays and stayed later than she planned because the conversation was good and nobody rushed her. Adriana came too, though not at first as a scheduled thing. It began with her stopping by to drop off program documents he needed to review, which was unnecessary since she could have emailed them and they both knew it. Then it became dinner sometimes when Talia asked her to stay. Talia had decided early on that Adriana was interesting largely because Adriana answered her questions directly rather than simplifying them, and Talia had strong opinions about people who talked down to her. Adriana was not comfortable in small spaces at first. She was accustomed to her own apartment, which was large and quiet, and did not have crayon drawings on the refrigerator or a child who asked follow-up questions at the dinner table. But discomfort in Adriana's case was something she moved through rather than away from. She learned the rhythms of that small kitchen. She learned that Talia liked her eggs without the runny part, and that Damon made coffee strong enough that most people added water to it afterward. One evening in late autumn, Talia was finishing her homework at the kitchen table while Adriana sat across from her reading through a briefing document. Damon was at the counter making dinner. The radio was on low. It was an ordinary evening, not significant in any external way, just the kind of evening that accumulates into a life. Talia looked up from her workbook and asked Adriana with the directness that was simply her nature if she could stay for breakfast in the morning. Adriana looked across the kitchen at Damon. He was watching her with a quiet expression, not pushing, not waiting, just present in the way he was always present, steady and without performance. He said, "That's up to her." Adriana looked back at Talia and said, "I'd like that, if it's okay with your dad." Talia turned to Damon with the solemn gravity of a child facilitating a negotiation. Damon smiled, the real one, the one that reached his eyes, the one that Talia could always tell from the other kind. He said, "It's okay with me." It had started with a text message sent to the wrong person at 2 in the morning. A man at the bottom of his endurance, trying to hold a life together with $4 and a folded piece of pride. A message that was never supposed to be seen, that contained nothing but need and exhaustion, and the particular honesty that only comes when a person has run out of ways to hide. And it had led here. Not to a perfect life, because no story ends in a perfect life, but to a kitchen table with room for 3. To a child who slept without fear. To a man who had learned that asking for help is not the same as losing your dignity. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone see the truth of where you are. And to a woman who had spent years building walls against the very warmth she had been missing, who found her way back not through anything grand, but through one honest conversation, one act of decency, one small kitchen where someone finally made her feel like she could stay. There's something worth holding on to in that. The idea that our worst moments, the ones we'd give anything to take back, sometimes open doors we never would have knocked on. That a mistake made in desperation can lead to a truth that needed telling. That one person choosing not to look away can change the direction of another person's life entirely. And maybe that's the most human thing there is. Not that we always get it right, but that sometimes, when we're honest enough and brave enough and just tired enough to stop pretending something real finally has a chance to begin. If this story meant something to you, we'd love for you to subscribe to our channel. Every week we share stories like this one about quiet strength, unlikely connection, and the moments that remind us what people are really capable of. Hit subscribe and we'll make sure the next story finds you.